The CEO repossessed a single dad's tools. He used what was left to build a $2-meter engine. 47 engineers had looked at that engine. 47. Each one with a credential on their chest and a company car in the lot. The engine sat at the center of Vortex Dynamics' main assembly floor, like a problem no one wanted to own. A $4, 3 million prototype that hadn't fired once in 11 months. Then a man in a worn canvas jacket walked in with a 6-year-old girl, a cracked wrench set in a canvas roll, and a stuffed yellow rabbit named Cog tucked under his daughter's arm. The new CEO, Nadia Harlow, looked at him the way someone looks at the wrong address on a package. She said, loud enough for the room to hear, that she wasn't running a daycare. She said someone must have gotten the contracts confused. What she did not know, what not a single person in that building knew, was that the man had already solved the problem in his head before he'd crossed the parking lot. Stay with this one. It earns it. His name was Mason Holt. He was 32 years old. He drove a 2003 pickup that listed slightly to the left, because one of the rear leaf springs had cracked 2 winters ago, and he hadn't had the margin to replace it yet. He wore the same jacket most days, olive canvas, left breast pocket torn at the corner where his daughter had grabbed it during a nightmare when she was 4. He did not iron it. He did not explain it. It was a jacket. It kept him warm. His daughter's name was Wren. She was 6 years and 4 months old, and she carried Cog everywhere. Cog was a stuffed rabbit yellow once, now the color of old cream, with one missing eye and a small blue bow tie that Wren had tied herself 3 times because the original had come loose. Cog had attended 17 of Mason's job sites. Cog had sat on the hood of the pickup during brake jobs. Cog had once been left on a bus, and Mason had driven 4 miles back to the depot at 11 at night to retrieve him, because Wren did not sleep without Cog, and Mason did not sleep when Wren did not sleep. This is how it had been for 2 years. Just the 2 of them, and Cog. Mason had pulled into the Vortex Dynamics lot at 7:45 on a Tuesday morning in March, 40 minutes before his appointment. He'd gotten Wren from the back seat. Slowly, she was still half asleep. Cog pressed against her cheek, and he'd set her on the hood of the truck while he buttoned her jacket, 1 button at a time. She swatted his hand away at the 3rd button because she wanted to do it herself. He let her. She got it wrong on the first try. She did not ask for help. She corrected it on her own and looked up at him with the specific satisfaction of a person who has handled a problem without intervention. He had smoothed down her hair with his palm, just once. Then he had picked up his canvas tool roll from the truck bed, taken her hand, and walked toward the lobby. He had been told the job was a freelance diagnostic consult, 3 days, possibly 4. The rate was one he hadn't seen in 18 months. He hadn't asked why they were offering it. He'd needed the money in the particular aching way that isn't dramatic, it's just arithmetic. Wren's school shoes had a split in the left sole. The gas bill had been delayed as long as he could delay it. And there was a medication, nothing serious, the doctor had said, just a maintenance prescription that cost $64 a month and wasn't covered by his current arrangement. He had needed this job. He had taken this job. What he had not anticipated was Nadia Harlow. She was 31 years old. She had been named CEO of Vortex Dynamics 14 months ago by a board that had been watching the company hemorrhage talent and contracts for the better part of 3 years. She was sharp, fast, and deeply aware that she had something to prove, not to the board, exactly, but to the men on that board who had phrased their confidence in her like a conditional sentence. She wore structured blazers and said everything with the velocity of someone who had once been told she spoke too slowly. She was also, on this particular morning, being given bad information. The man feeding her that information was standing beside her when Mason walked in. His name was Cameron Fitch. He was 44, silver-haired, polished in the way that requires maintenance, the kind of man whose shoes were always correct for the room. He was Vortex Dynamics' chief technical officer and had held the position for 6 years. He had also, 8 years prior, worked at a firm in Austin called Precision Drive Systems. where a younger engineer had built something remarkable and then disappeared into grief and fatherhood without ever attaching his name to it properly. Cameron Fitch remembered that engineer. He had been counting on the fact that no one else would. When Mason walked into the lobby, Cameron said nothing. He looked at Mason's canvas jacket. He looked at Cog under Wren's arm, yellow, slightly deflated, one glass eye watching the lobby with serenity. He let a small expression pass across his face. Not contempt, exactly. Something more careful than that. Nadia Harlow said it aloud. "I'm sorry," she said, stepping forward. Are you the consult?" "Yes," Mason said. She looked at Wren. She looked at Cog. "We don't have facilities for—" She paused. "This isn't really a bring-your-child environment." "She'll sit," Mason said. "She's quiet. That's not I mean." Nadia turned to her assistant, a woman named Grace Ellison, who had been with the company for 11 years and who had, in that time, developed a nearly flawless sense of when she was watching something important happen. Is there somewhere the child can wait? With someone? I'll stay with her," Grace said immediately. It was the fastest she'd spoken all morning. Cameron Fitch stepped toward Mason then. He did it slowly, like a man inspecting a machine. "You're the diagnostic?" he asked. "That's what it said on the contract." Mason said. "Holt, right?" Mason Holt. "Right." Cameron smiled, not at Mason. Just into the middle distance, the way a man smiles at a private memory. "We've had some of the best technical minds in the industry look at this engine," he said. "I want to make sure your background is up to the challenge. What's your most recent technical credit?" The lobby had several people in it. A junior engineer near the elevator, 2 assistants at a desk, a security officer near the door. They were all listening in the way people listen when they're pretending not to. Mason said, "I'll know more once I look at it." Cameron let the silence sit for a moment. Then he said, "Right," in a tone that carried a complete sentence inside it. The sentence was, "This is going nowhere." Nadia looked at Mason one more time. Then she looked at the tool roll under his arm. It was old canvas, tightly wound, the fabric darkened along the edges from years of oil and handling. "Those are your tools?" she said. "Most of them," Mason said. Someone near the elevator laughed. A brief sound, corrected quickly, but it was there. Mason did not look toward it. He stood in the lobby of Vortex Dynamics with his cracked wrench set and his 6-year-old daughter and her stuffed rabbit, and he said nothing. And he did not adjust his expression, and he waited for someone to show him where the engine was. Wren looked up at him. She was holding Cog by one ear. She said, "Daddy, that man has bad shoes." She meant Cameron's shoes were too shiny. She had a theory, developed from somewhere Mason couldn't source, that people who polished their shoes too much were untrustworthy. It was not a theory he taught her. He squeezed her hand once and said nothing. Grace took Wren to a small office near the lobby. There was a couch, a low table, a set of colored pencils someone had left, and Wren settled in with Cog propped against a pencil cup and immediately began drawing. Grace sat nearby. She watched the door through which Mason had disappeared, and she turned something over quietly in her mind. The engine room was in the back of the building, past the main assembly floor, through a set of double doors that required a key card. Cameron escorted Mason personally. Nadia followed at a distance that was not quite professional. The junior engineer, his name was Theo, 24, 3rd week on the job, trailed them because he hadn't been told not to. The engine was something to see. It sat on a test rig in the center of a climate-controlled room, surrounded by workstations loaded with diagnostic software, cable harnesses that went nowhere useful, and the accumulated documentation of 11 months of failure binders, printouts, sticky notes in 3 colors. The machine itself was a hybrid propulsion prototype, precision-machined, titanium-cased, built to replace the drive system in a line of industrial survey drones that 3 government contracts depended on. It was supposed to generate 340 kilowatts of continuous output. It had not generated anything. It sat there and refused, with the absolute confidence of a thing that knows it has been assembled incorrectly and is simply waiting for someone to notice. Mason walked a full circle around it. He didn't open anything. He didn't connect anything. He just looked. Cameron stood with his arms crossed. "The issue has been localized to the power management subsystem," he said. "Our engineers believe it's a firmware conflict between the dual inverters." Mason crouched down. He looked at a seam along the lower casing. "The inverters are fine," he said. Cameron's arms shifted slightly. Just slightly. 47 engineers have. "The inverters are fine," Mason said again. He wasn't arguing. He wasn't raising his voice. He said it the way someone states a measurement. He stood. He looked at the cable routing along the left flank of the engine. Something in his face settled into a quietness that Theo, watching from the doorway, would describe later as the most focused expression he had ever seen on a human being. Mason did not say anything else. He set his tool roll on the workbench, unrolled it, and picked up a single instrument, a thin signal probe, old but calibrated, the handle worn smooth from use. He looked at the cable routing for another long moment. Then he looked at the seam again. He said, "Who signed off on the thermal interface at the third junction?" Silence. Cameron said, "That would be in the build documentation." "Get it," Mason said. Not, "Could you get it?" Not, "If you have a chance." Just, "Get it." Theo went to get it. They didn't know what was coming. They had no reason to yet. But something in the room had shifted in the way rooms shift when a person with real authority enters them. Not rank, not title, but the authority of someone who simply and completely understands the thing in front of them. Nadia felt it. She didn't name it. She filed it somewhere and kept her expression neutral. Mason had grown up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in a house where the driveway was always occupied by something partially disassembled. His father repaired heavy equipment loaders, compactors, machines with names that took up half a sentence. His mother had taught herself electrical systems from a correspondence course and had wired their own addition at 34. They were people who solved problems with their hands and their patience, and they had raised Mason to do the same. He had been, by any measure, exceptional at it. He had earned a full scholarship to Georgia Tech at 18 mechanical and electrical engineering, dual track, and had graduated in 3 years. Not because he was in a hurry, but because the work didn't resist him. He had gone directly into a position at Precision Drive Systems in Austin, where he had spent 4 years building drive architectures for high-torque applications. The last project he'd finished there, a hybrid propulsion system for autonomous industrial drones, had been, by the assessment of everyone who saw it, the most elegant solution to that class of problem that had been produced in a decade. He had never published it. He had never claimed it, because in the 4th year, in March, his wife had died. Her name was Clara. She had been 30 years old. She had been driving home from her sister's house on a Wednesday evening when a truck ran a red light. The paramedics had said it was fast. Mason did not find the word fast to be a comfort, exactly, but he held it anyway, because there was nothing else in the box where comfort was supposed to be. He had left Precision Drive Systems the following month. He hadn't planned to. He had simply walked out one Tuesday, driven home, picked Ren up from the neighbor who had been watching her, and not gone back. Ren was 4. She had her mother's eyes. She had asked for Clara every day for 6 months, with the patient insistence of someone who believes the answer is coming. Mason had answered her every time. The answer did not get easier. It got different. He had taken contract work after that. Honest work. Oil change bays, heavy equipment repair, electrical diagnostics on the side. He had moved to a smaller house. He had learned, slowly and without grace, how to cook, how to braid hair badly enough that Ren would correct him, how to keep a schedule built for 2, when one of the 2 was 6 years old and did not understand why the world required schedules. He had a sketchbook in the nightstand drawer. Clara had given it to him. Inside, in her handwriting, on the inside cover, "For the things you're still figuring out." He had not opened it in 4 months. He knew it was there. That was enough. He had not thought about Precision Drive Systems in a long time. He had not thought about what he'd built there, or where it had gone, or whose name was on it now. He was about to think about it. Theo brought the build documentation. It was a binder, thick, tabbed, the kind of document that takes several people several months to produce. Mason took it. He found the section on thermal interface specifications in under 2 minutes without using the index. He read for approximately 45 seconds. Then he closed the binder. He said, the third junction was spec'd for a 16mm interface pad. The pad that was installed is 14mm. The gap has been causing a thermal bleed that registers below the sensor threshold on the firmware diagnostic. The inverters aren't the problem. The inverters have been compensating for 11 months. One of them is probably close to end of life now from the load. Silence. Actual silence. The kind that has weight, Cameron said. That's not possible. The build was signed off by, I know who signed off on it, Mason said. He was looking at a specific page in the binder. He was looking at a signature. He did not say anything else. Cameron's expression did not change, not visibly, but something behind it did, something recalibrated. We'd need to verify that through our process, Cameron said. I'd want our internal team to, you have a 14mm pad where a 16 belongs, Mason said. The fix is about 4 hours. If you want verification, pull the casing and measure it, Nadia said. Pull the casing. She said it like it was simple. Because it was. They pulled the casing. The pad was 14mm. Theo measured it twice. He measured it a third time because he did not trust himself. The number did not change. It was 14mm. It had been 14mm for 11 months. 47 engineers, 6 firmware updates, and $4. $3 million in prototype investment had been arranged around a 2mm gap that no one had stopped to look at because everyone had been told to look at the firmware. Everyone had been told that by Cameron Fitch. At 3:17 inches the afternoon, Mason installed the correct thermal interface pad. He had sourced it from a supply shop 12 minutes away. It had cost $43. At 4:02, he reconnected the casing and ran the startup sequence. The engine fired. It didn't just start. It ran smooth, even, exactly at the power curve it had been designed to hit. The sound it made was the sound of a machine doing precisely what it was built to do. Theo, who had been standing near the door since the morning and had not been told to leave, took out his phone without thinking about it and started recording. Several other engineers had drifted into the room in the past hour. Word moves fast in small buildings, and they stood in a loose semicircle, looking at the running engine, with expressions that ranged from relief to disbelief, to something harder to name. Nadia Harlow stood very still. She was looking at Mason, not the engine. She was thinking something she was not ready to say yet. Cameron Fitch was looking at the binder. He was looking at the signature page, specifically at the sign-off on the thermal interface specifications. His own signature was there. It was not an error. He had signed off on the 14mm pad, knowing it was wrong, knowing the misspecification would create a problem that couldn't be easily diagnosed, knowing the engine wouldn't run and that the investigation would take months, and that every month the investigation took was a month, during which no one was asking questions about the IP provenance of the engine's core, architecture. The architecture that Mason Holt had built at Precision Drive Systems in 2018. The architecture that Cameron Fitch had transferred, quietly and without authorization, to Vortex Dynamics when he joined the company in 2021, where it had become the foundational design of this prototype, and where Mason's name appeared nowhere on the documentation. Cameron had hired Mason onto this consult for one reason, not because he expected Mason to solve it, because he expected Mason to look at the engine, recognize it, and say nothing because what was Mason going to say? That he'd built something similar years ago and had never filed the paperwork properly. Who would that serve? What Cameron had not anticipated was that Mason would recognize his own signature on the thermal interface specification. The real one. The one in the original build files from Precision Drive Systems, which Mason had filed in 2017, and which were currently stored on a portable hard drive in a shoebox under his bed, because Mason kept everything, not from sentimentality, but because his mother had told him that paper is patient and people are not. Mason had recognized it the moment he opened the binder. His own spec, his own number, crossed out and replaced with an incorrect one. In someone else's handwriting. He had said nothing for 2 hours. He had fixed the engine first, because the engine needed fixing, and that was what he was there to do. Now he picked up his phone. He made a call. The call lasted 45 seconds. Then he set his phone down on the workbench and looked at Cameron. "How long have you been at this company?" Mason asked. Cameron said, 6 years. "When did you bring the propulsion architecture over?" The room was quiet. Not the quiet of nothing happening, the quiet of everyone holding their breath because something real was about to surface. "I don't know what the thermal load distribution curve on this engine," Mason said. "The rotor geometry, the harmonic damping system. I built those at Precision Drive Systems in 2017. I built them for a man named Elijah Marsh, who was my department lead. And I filed the technical specifications on a Tuesday in November. And I have the originals, date stamped, my handwriting, my signature." Cameron said, "That's a serious allegation." "I know," Mason said. "That's why I called my lawyer." Grace Ellison had been standing in the doorway for the past 11 minutes. She had come to tell Mason that Wren had eaten a granola bar Grace had found in her bag and had drawn 4 pictures and wanted her father. She had arrived at the doorway just in time to hear Mason describe the rotor geometry. She had worked at Vortex Dynamics for 11 years. She had been there when Cameron joined. She had been there when the propulsion architecture was first presented. She had thought, at the time, that it was extraordinary for something developed in-house so quickly. She had filed that thought away in the same place she filed everything that didn't add up, and she had never retrieved it. She retrieved it now. She said, "Mason, there's a set of original procurement records from the 2021 onboarding. Cameron's onboarding. They're in physical storage in the archive room. I processed them myself." Everyone looked at Grace. She looked back at them with the calm of a person who has been in the right for a long time and has simply been waiting for the room to catch up. The records were retrieved. It took 22 minutes to locate the physical binder paper, not digital. The kind of documentation that gets filed and forgotten in rooms no one visits. Grace knew the archive system because she had organized it. She found the binder on the 3rd shelf, behind a series of vendor contracts from the same period. Inside, Cameron Fitch's original IP disclosure form. The standard form every new technical employee was required to complete. The form that asked, in plain language, whether the employee was bringing any proprietary intellectual property from a prior employer and whether they had authorization to do so. Cameron had marked the IP transfer field, none. Behind that form, in a section labeled Technical Reference Materials, was a document that had no reason to exist in Cameron Fitch's onboarding file. It was a 73-page technical specification. At the top of every page, in the header field, Precision Drive Systems. And at the bottom of the first page, in a signature block that had been partially obscured by a sticker that had since dried and curled at the corner, revealing the text beneath, Mason D. Holt. The 14th of November, 2017. Nadia Harlow held the document in both hands. She read it for a long time. When she looked up, her face had the expression of someone who has just understood the shape of a very large mistake, not just someone else's, but their own, because she had hired Cameron. She had extended his contract twice. She had presented his work at board meetings. She looked at Cameron. Cameron looked at the exit. The board liaison, a man named Adrian Walsh, who had been called in on 30 minutes' notice when Nadia's assistant had flagged the situation as requiring documentation, was in the room by then. Also present, 2 people from the legal department who had walked in quickly and now stood near the wall. Cameron said, "I'd like to speak with counsel," before. "I'd like you to leave the building," Nadia said. She did not raise her voice. She said it the way someone states a fact. Two members of building security were already at the door. Cameron walked out between them, still in his correct shoes, his expression arranged into something between offense and calculation. He did not say anything else. He did not look back. Theo watched him go and then turned to look at the engine, which was still running. It was the following morning before Nadia came to find Mason. He was in the parking lot, loading his tool roll into the truck. Ren was already in the back seat. Cog was propped against the window, watching the parking lot with one glass eye. Ren was eating a piece of toast she'd brought from the break room, wrapped in a paper towel, because she'd asked Grace if there was toast, and Grace had made toast. Nadia walked across the lot. She was not in her blazer. She had on a simpler jacket. Her hands were in her pockets. She said, "I owe you an apology." Mason closed the tailgate and turned around. "What I said in the lobby yesterday," she said, "about the daycare remark, about your tools. I made assumptions that had nothing to do with your ability, and everything to do with my own, the way I was reading the room." She paused. "I was wrong. I was specifically wrong to say what I said in front of your daughter. I don't have an excuse for that," Mason said. "I've heard worse." "That's not actually a comfort," she said. "No," he agreed. "It wasn't meant to be." She looked at him for a moment. Not the way she'd looked at him in the lobby. Something more direct than that. "The board met this morning," she said. "Cameron's contract is terminated. There will be a legal process. Your IP claim, we've already flagged it to our legal team as legitimate. We'd like to make this right. The formal kind of right, not just the apology kind." "I know what legal right looks like," Mason said. "I've looked into it." "I believe you." She reached into her jacket and pulled out an envelope. She held it out to him. "The board has authorized a consulting retainer, long-term, proper credit on the architecture, and a formal offer to come on as lead technical director for the propulsion program if you want it. The terms are in there. You don't have to answer now." Mason took the envelope. He looked at it. He set it on the truck hood. "The credit," he said. "That's the part that matters. My name on the work I built. The rest we can negotiate." "Your name will be on it," she said. That was the first thing the board agreed to. A pause. The parking lot was quiet, except for the sound of the building's ventilation system and a distant compressor running somewhere. Ren leaned out the window. She had Cog in one hand and the last piece of toast in the other, and she looked at Nadia Harlow with the focused assessment of a person who has been thinking about something. She said, "Are you the one who said the bad thing to my dad?" Nadia crouched down. Right there in the parking lot, in her good jacket, she came down to Ren's level and looked at her directly. She did not look over Ren's head. She did not address Mason instead. She looked at the 6-year-old girl with the one-eyed rabbit. She said, "Yes, I said something unkind. I was wrong. I'm sorry." Ren looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at Cog. Some private consultation. Then she looked back at Nadia and said, "My mom would have known better." The parking lot was very quiet. Nadia did not say anything. There was nothing to say. She stayed where she was, crouched on the asphalt, for a moment that was longer than a moment. Then she put her hand briefly on the door frame, not a gesture of anything specific, just the small physical action of a person finding her footing, and she stood. Mason had his hand on the door handle. He was looking at the envelope on the hood. He picked it up. He put it in the inner pocket of his jacket, against the chest, next to the torn corner where Ren had grabbed it during a nightmare 2 years ago. "I'll read it tonight," he said. "Take your time," Nadia said. He got in the truck. Ren buckled herself. Cog was on her lap now, pressed to her chest with both arms, the way she held him when she was thinking about something serious. Mason pulled out of the parking lot onto the access road. At the first light, Ren looked at him in the rearview mirror. "Daddy," she said. "Yeah, can we have pancakes?" He turned onto the main road. The morning was clear and cold. The truck listed slightly to the left, the way it always did, the cracked spring shifting under the weight of the turn. We can have pancakes, he said. She looked out the window. Cog's remaining glass eye caught the light. Mason drove. There were no celebrations. The world did not stop. The morning kept going the way mornings do. A gas station, a school bus, a delivery truck, a red light, and then a green one. He had an envelope in his pocket and a cracked spring in the rear axle and a daughter in the back seat who was watching the world out the window with her stuffed rabbit against her chest. He drove. That was all.